2, 1. Fantastic. The first unit we're reviewing today was Unit 4, which is learning. Flip there in your notebooks, follow along. Highlight, circle, underline, star as we go. Not a huge unit, only 7 to 9% of the exam will be about this stuff. There are 9 standards that the College Board says, teachers, make sure you teach your students these 9 things. That's what we're going to go through. The first standard I want to cover is all about classical conditioning. The phrase I use all the time was that you can't control classical, meaning it's the stuff like heart rate and fear response that you don't have control over. It's not your somatic voluntary system, it's your involuntary autonomic reflexes, okay? So 2 names you need to know about. Pavlov, what kind of animal did Pavlov work with? What did he experiment on? Dogs, all right? And then Watson, what was little Albert? What kind of animal is little Albert? It was a human baby, very good, okay? Keywords that I hope you remember. Acquisition, to acquire something is to get something. Acquisition is when learning is starting to happen. Extinction, when learning goes away over time. A lot of y'all, you've lost your learning from AP Psychology. That's called extinction. Spontaneous recovery, it went extinct, but it comes back. It pops back up after a few days, after a few weeks, after a few months, after a few years. It's when you think about something you haven't thought about in a while, or you remember something that you had forgotten. That's spontaneous recovery. Generalization. What did Pavlov do with the dogs? He got them to do what at the sound of a what? He got them to salivate or drool at the sound of a bell. Wonderful. If they only salivated to a very specific bell, we would call that discrimination, being able to distinguish or tell the difference between multiple stimuli. If pretty much any bell or any bell-like sound made them salivate, that would be called generalization. When you generalize, when you react to anything that's even kind of similar to the thing that you were trained to react to. Chaining is when you learn that several things mean other things are going to happen. You learn that the light means the bell means the food. Or you learn that putting on your socks means you're going to put on your shoes, which means you're going to put the leash on your dog, which means your dog's going to get to go for a walk. That's when your dog learns chaining. This leads to that, which leads to this, which leads to that. It's also called higher order learning. Here's a name that you've probably forgotten. Rescorla talked about contingencies. What is contingent? Meaning what depends on what? Okay, and we all flip through your notebooks and make sure that you know what day was the classical conditioning day. Unit 4 day 1. Okay, fantastic. Rescorla was the one who did the math on like the more often 2 things are paired, the stronger the predictability or the relationship would be. I got some random letters at the bottom of the screen. What does this mean? US leads to UR. The unconditioned stimulus automatically causes a unconditioned response. If we want learning to happen, we pair the unconditioned stimulus with a, what's the NS stand for? With a neutral stimulus, something like a bell or a light that didn't mean anything. And if we keep pairing it with the US, eventually that neutral stimulus will become a what? Conditioned stimulus. Conditioning is learning. So this means that you will eventually learn to have a conditioned, a learned response to the thing that used to be neutral. That's when learning has happened. Looking back at Unit 4 day 1, any questions, anything you want me to go over about Pavlov and classical conditioning? Yep. Chaining is when they learn that the socks mean the shoes, mean the leash, mean you're going outside, mean you're going for a walk. It's like learning the number of things are all connected to each other. All right. The second big type of conditioning, what day was this? Unit 4 day, was it day 2? Operant conditioning. It's when you choose how to operate. This is the stuff that you can control, the voluntary things. Law of effect says, if you do something and get a reward, how does that change you? If you do something and get a reward, then you will do it again. That's the law of effect. If you do something and get punished, you'll do it less. That's Edward Thorndike's big idea. Anyone remember what animal Thorndike worked with? Meow. I picture a cat with a thorn in its paw. Haha, stupid cats. That's how I remember that Thorndike had to do with cats. B.F. Skinner. He's probably the most famous operant conditioning researcher. He worked with pigeons and rats. He locked them in the little box and he graphed out their responses. How could shocks or food change their behavior? So number 3, what's an example? If you are good in my class, how can I give you positive reinforcement? I can give you a grade. What else could I add to your situation? Positive reinforcement. I could give you candy. I could say nice words to you. Wonderful. What's an example? If you're really good in my class and I give you negative reinforcement, what does that mean? Negative. You don't have to take the final. I stop giving you homework. I stop saying the mean things to you that I always say, right? That would be negative reinforcement. It's still a reward, but I'm taking something away. What's an example of positive punishment? You're bad in my class. Positive punishment. I give you a bad grade, more word, electric shock. Beautiful. Yeah, all the desks have electric shock built into them. Just kidding. Negative punishment. What might I take away from you if you're being bad in this class? Your phone. Take your phone away. Take your friends away. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, whatever. Schedules of reinforcement. How often do you get out the rewards? Do y'all remember that in continuous and intermittent? What day is this on? Still day 2 or are we on to day 3? Wow, we covered a lot. So continuous means every time you're good, you get the reward. Every time you're bad, you get the punishment. That's what continuous would be. Life does not operate on continuous reinforcement. If so, we would always all be good and we would never be bad. If you really got a speeding ticket every time you sped, you'd stop speeding. But life doesn't work on continuous reinforcement. It works on intermittent reinforcement, occasional. So if you know when the reward's coming, that's fixed. How many of you play a sport where coaches come to watch people? Okay. Do you know which day the coaches are coming? If you do, that's called a fixed schedule. You know they're going to be here on Tuesday or Friday or for the big game. If you don't know when they're going to be there, that'll be a variable schedule. It changes. You don't know when the reward's going to happen. Interval means time-based. In baseball, typically a college or high school pitches their best pitcher on a Friday. That'd be interval-based. You know, every Friday it's going to be the star pitcher. Ratio-based would be like every 3 games they pitch the star pitcher. So this week it could be a Monday, next week it could be a Friday, and then the week after that it could be Saturday and Tuesday, and then the week after that it could be Thursday by itself. So ratio is the number of times you do the thing. Interval is based on like hours or days that go by. The one they like to ask about the most, slot machines. What kind of schedule does a slot machine do? You put a quarter in, you pull the lever. Do you know when the reward's going to come? So it's definitely intermittent, not continuous. But out of the 4 intermittent types, do you know when the reward's going to come? Nope. So it's variable. And is it based on how much time has gone by, or is it based on how many times you pull the lever? It's about you pulling the lever, right? You got to pull the lever. You got to play to win. So that would be not time-based, but ratio-based. So slot machine variable ratio leads to you doing the thing for a very long time because you just never know if the next time is going to be the jackpot. Superstitions are when you develop these weird patterns of behavior because your little pigeon brain thinks you'll get a reward for it. That's why some of y'all have lucky socks or eat a certain meal on game days or have to listen to a specific song while you're warming up or before the show. You're superstitious. It's been you've been operant conditioned to act a certain way. I'll need to know how the graphs work. Steeper line means you're doing the thing more. It means that conditioning learning is happening. And then the very last bullet point here for standard 2. Are you motivated by things outside of you? Trophy, money, fame? Or are you just motivated to do the thing because you like doing it? External, extrinsic, internal, intrinsic. You're doing it to get something? You're doing it because you just like doing it. Does anybody remember what the over-justification effect is? It's the idea that if like a kid likes to read and you start to do what happens? If you give them too much extrinsic motivation, if you give them rewards, if you pay them for reading, they won't like reading as much. They will lose their intrinsic motivation. Any questions about this stuff from Unit 4, Day 2 on operant conditioning? Yes, ma'am. The law of effect is if you do something and get rewarded, you'll do it more. If you do something and get punished for it, you'll do it less. So rewards increase behavior, punishments decrease behavior. Does that make sense? Great. Example, just a reminder, if my dog is barking in the car because he wants the window to be down, he barks and barks and barks. If I eventually put the window down, what lesson has that taught my dog? Barking makes the window go down. So if you reward bad behavior, guess what that dog or baby or child or boyfriend is going to do? They're going to keep doing the annoying thing. Yeah. right? If your significant other is kind of being a jerk because they want attention, and then you give him that attention, they're going to keep being a jerk. That's how operant conditioning works. So be careful what you are rewarding. All right, standards 3 through 7, all on one slide here. Quick refreshers. This is all part of the learning unit. Biologically, there's only so much we can do. Are we ever going to be able to learn how to fly? No, we cannot fly. Foods that make us throw up will make us sick. Raccoons will always try and watch their food. That's called biological preparedness. Our bodies are prepared to learn certain things better than others. Mammals, we avoid foods that make us sick. That's what Cherry Garcia, that's what he proved in his research, where he zapped the mice and gave them weird tasting water. And when they threw up, they weren't afraid of the buzzer with the zapping. They were afraid of the food. Because to their little mouse brains, food makes you sick. Noises don't make you sick. It's just a biological trait that we have. Number 4, what's another word for insight learning? We call it the what kind of moment? The aha moment. It's when all of a sudden an answer comes to you. The researcher was Kohler, and he worked with a little chimpanzee named Sultan. They might ask about that. Some years they talk about Sultan the chimp, and you just got to know it's Kohler or it's insight learning. Number 5, Tolman talked about latent learning. It's when you'll learn something and you don't have an opportunity to show that you've learned until much later on when there's a reward. And that's when you demonstrate the learning. It's like you've gone through your life soaking up information, and then when you get on Jeopardy, you have a chance to use that information. That would be latent learning. The experiment he did that I talked to y'all about and showed you the graph of was the mice that were just like wandering around the maze, just chilling. But when there was cheese at the end of the maze, all of a sudden, they were perfect at the maze. And what he realized is that they had been learning the whole time. They just didn't have a reason to show it. So the learning was hidden. It didn't show up until later. Latent learning, it's hidden, it shows up later. All right, so the toll man. I picture the mice in a maze. I picture a little toll booth. If you're running late, you got to pay the toll. I don't know, latent learning. You got to come up with some mnemonics for that. Number 6, he's come up almost every unit. He'll come up again in a minute. But social learning, Bandura and the Bobo dolls. When you see other people learn something, right? If in the mock exam, if Jasmine cleans her room and then gets money for it, you're gonna go clean your room. Not because you got the reward, but because you can learn through Jasmine. Vicarious learning. Number 7, those poor little doggies, Martin Seligman studied. He shocked them, and they couldn't do anything about it. And eventually they just gave up. That's what learned helplessness is. It's when you don't even try anymore. You feel like it's out of your control, external locus of control, out of your control, that you don't even bother. Any questions about numbers 3 through 7? All right, the last 2 standards from unit 4. We talked about behavior modification, how we can use the principles of learning and conditioning to change your behavior, and specifically in forms of therapy. So we talked about if you have a specific fear, a very specific behavior, whether it is you're addicted to smoking or you're afraid of heights. Mary Cover Jones and Joseph Wolpe, they did an experiment on another human, not little Albert, who became afraid of white fluffy things, but little Peter, who they made less afraid of white fluffy things. They systematically desensitized him. They slowly exposed him to his fear until it didn't bother him as much, until his heart rate didn't go up. He had the biofeedback, right? They measured what was going on with his body, biofeedback, and they allowed him to develop a more positive association between this thing he was afraid of and how his body was doing. Okay, I read a book about biofeedback where they the treatment is they put this little hat on you that measures your brain waves, and basically they put a little chart on and it shows your brain waves, and they basically tell you to try and slow your brain waves down. And you don't really know how to do that, but while your brain looks at this little graph, your brain actually kind of figures out what it needs to do to slow down your brainwaves. And you can't even explain what you're doing, but you do have control over your brain's activity. You do have coping strategies, mechanisms for dealing with stress. So you can unlearn some of these fears. That's the idea of behavior modification, using behaviorism to help people out. Number 9, these are all the people the College Board lists out that you got to know from this unit. We talked about Bandura, all of these people are behaviorists, right? It's all about learning, but Bandura, the behaviorist with Bobo dolls, social learning theory, observational learning. We talked about Garcia, taste aversion, Pavlov and the dogs, Rescorla and predictability, contingencies, the math, the associations of how you learn conditioning. We talked about Skinner, the rats and pigeons, operant conditioning. Thorndike is the guy who came up with the law of effect with the cats, rewards and punishments. Toland did latent learning. And John B. Watson is the behaviorist, the father of behaviorism. John B. Watson, who did a little Albert experiment. Any questions about Unit 4? We're going to do some practice questions. These are actually old AP questions. So I'm going to give you all like 10 seconds, and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and y'all will all shout the answers out. Okay, so give it 10 seconds. The reappearance after a rest period of an extinguished conditioned response. The response was gone, and it reappears. 1, 2, 3. E, spontaneous recovery. A person who is fearful of rattlesnakes, but not garden snakes. They can tell the difference between these two similar animals. What are they showing? 1, 2, 3. B, discrimination learning. A child has learned that her grandparents ignore rather than reward her tantrums. Which of the following principles are the grandparents using to control the child's behavior? By not connecting her tantrums to attention. So by ignoring the kid, eventually what's going to happen to her tantrums? They're going to go away. Are they rewarding the kid? Is it A, B, or C? They're not rewarding the kid. So what's going to happen over time? The answer here is D. They're trying to use extinction. They're trying to get that behavior to go away. If we don't reward it, she'll stop doing it. Y'all need to work on that with your dogs and little siblings and boyfriends and girlfriends, right? If you ignore them when they're doing the annoying thing, they'll eventually stop doing the annoying thing. Might take time, might be tough. A person closes a window to shut out the traffic noise. So they close the window, there's a reduction in noise. So now they keep doing the thing. What is this an example of? Are they, when they close the window, are they being rewarded or punished? They're being rewarded. How are they being rewarded? What goes away? So 74 here is B. This is negative reinforcement. This is a fun one. Classical conditioning. So bell, food, drool, bell, food, drool, bell, food, drool. It's most efficient when the food, the unconditioned stimulus, the thing that they automatically respond to, it's most helpful when the food is what? It's supposed to be bell, food, drool, bell, food, drool, bell, food, bell, food, bell, food. So it's most efficient when the food is bell, food. It's A. It's A. You want bell, food, bell, food, bell, food. You want the food to be right after the bell. That's when the connection is going to be the strongest. Here's an actual free response, 2010, that they gave students. We've not talked about 1 and 2. We've not reviewed 1 and 2 in the last week or two. We have already reviewed, though, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So if y'all got this free response next Friday, y'all should do a pretty good job with it. It says, for each of the pairs below, use an example to show how the first term affects the second term, or how the first term is related to the second term. And you have to give examples. You can't just say the serial position effect is the ability to remember the first and last things on a list, period. Recall is the ability to remember something, period. That would not be good enough to get the point. You have to say things like, when Sarah makes her grocery list, she's most likely to recall or remember the items at the beginning and end of her grocery list. You had to give an example to get the points in this particular year. How many points is this free response worth? Well, this one's an easy one. There's just 7 bullet points. It's worth 7 points. What should your first words be? I mean, yeah, but like, I think your first word should be the example. When Kayla is remembering A list of names. When Sarah is going to the grocery store. When Joshua is given a list of 30 words, he will remember, blah, blah, blah. That's how I would start this free response. Here's what an actual student wrote. Y'all decide if you'd give them these points or not. Y'all, free response is a big deal. It's a third of your AP score, and it will be your performance final next week. I could be having you write free responses every single day to practice, but for some reason, I'm choosing not to make you write them. We're just reading through examples. I hope that as we do this, y'all are thinking about how you would respond to the free response, because y'all are going to have one next Friday, and you're going to have 2 on the AP exam. So here the student wrote, the stereotype effect influences the ability to recall from memory items from a larger list. Given a list of numbers, there's the example. A person will be more readily able to recall those from the start and the list due to the stereotype effect. Would you give them the point for number 1? Yes. Good job. Functional fixedness. Number 2 is the association of an object with its proper function with a low degree of functional fixedness. One may use objects in alternative ways to facilitate problem solving, as do many heroes in action movies. A pen may be used as a splint for a broken finger, for example. They do a good job explaining functional fixedness. Did they give an example? Yeah, this last sentence is where they had the example. They got both points, 1 and 2. The College Board said they got point 1 by saying start and end of a list, and they got point 2 by talking about the pen as a splint. Good job, the students. Let's see how they did with 3 and 4. In an experiment, an operational definition is a definition of variables and a precise description of their application in the experiment. Operational definitions like defining time as being measured in minutes via a stopwatch allow for accurate replication in an experiment. Did they do a good job of explaining how operational definition impacts replication? Did they do this? Yeah, they did. I think this is pretty good. Let's see number 4. The use of a double blind in research means that neither researchers or the subjects know which group is receiving the experimental control agents. This is utilized to prevent biased behavior by both researchers and subjects. For example, if a new drug is being tested against a placebo, the research participants on this student is brilliant. Do you think they got point 4? Let's check it out. Okay, they did. Point 3 was awarded when they said minutes via stopwatch. Remember, the example was important here. And then the double blind technique, when they talked about which group being the placebo. So because they mentioned a drug study, they got this point. So they had to talk about the specific example, a drug study. They did not, I don't think they got all 7 points. Operant conditioning, the reinforcement or discouragement of behavior via the addition or subtraction of consequences, can be used to create superstition by giving birds in a box a food reward. We watched a video about this. I hope you all watched it, Zoomers, but we watched a video of the bird flapping its wings over and over again. The bird replicates the behavior. I think that they did a good job with 5. How about 6? In the overnotification effect, behaviors that have been reinforced will only be performed for a reward. For example, a child who receives money as reinforcement may cease getting good scores if money is not offered. You think they got point 6? They did not get point 6. They're supposed to be connecting the over-justification effect with reinforcement. It's about how rewards impact motivation. So why do you think they didn't get point 6? What are they missing here? They used the word reward. So what's the other part of the over-justification effect? Great. So my guess is going to be that they didn't get this point because they didn't do a good enough job of talking about intrinsic, boom. Ha, good job, us. The essay did not get point 6 because the example does not mention how intrinsic motivation goes down. Man, so this kid is so smart. They gave a good partway example, but because they didn't talk about all aspects of the over-justification effect, they didn't get the point. So y'all, when you're doing the free response, always write a little extra just in case. The myelin sheath is a covering of Schwann cells over the axon of a neuron. What are they supposed to be doing? How the myelin sheath impacts neural impulse. So I'm looking for something about it speeds up, can't travel fast enough without myelin sheath. I think they definitely got 0.7. This kid is so smart. Whoever their teacher was did a great job. Wasn't me, wasn't one of my students. So this student would have gotten 6 of the 7 points. Any questions while you're looking back at your notebooks through Unit 4? Any questions about Unit 4? All right, we're gonna take a 4-minute break for y'all to go to the bathroom, get water, take a nap, look at Instagram, look at Snapchat. And in a second, we'll come back and do Unit 5, which is the biggest unit of the entire year. Flip to Unit 5 in your notebooks, please. This was the biggest unit, 13 to 17%. So about 1 out of every, math is hard, 6 questions will be about this stuff. So there's still just 9 standards, but you can expect 1 or 2 questions about each standard. All right, so the first standard I want to go over in cognition, kind of an introduction to cognition. Cognition is your thinking. So the words the College Board uses, I think these are kind of silly words because some of this seems really self-explanatory. I have no idea what they're going to ask you about on the AP exam, but here are the words they said we need to cover. Effortful versus automatic processing. So there's some things in your life that you just get automatically without having to think very hard about it. Automatic processing. The things that you eat, where you are in the world, how to get from A to B. Your brain just does that stuff on its own. There's some things you have to try really hard at. The psychology content. You have to try really hard to remember these weird words and definitions. Whereas like if I ask you who's going to prom with who, you remember that stuff immediately because your brain's really good at social connections and stories. It's really bad at words and facts and definitions. That's why I try to always give you all stories and examples and images and say things like, remember the video of the raccoon? Or remember the example when I took my nephews to the zoo? Because your brain is better at stories than just words. That's the idea of effortful versus automatic processing. Same thing, deep versus shallow. Deep processing is when you really get the meaning. So like if I present a new word to you, or if I present a word in Spanish to you, okay, a shallow form of processing would be like if I'm asking you like, does it have the letter E in it? What color font is it? How big was the word? That's like shallow processing. Deep processing is when you can understand what the Spanish word means and you can connect it to other Spanish words. You can use it in a sentence. You can think of a story or a time where that word has come up. Okay. So if I talk to you about the word piñata, I could ask you a structural shallow question like, does the N have an Nye on it? Or I can ask you for a time you've experienced a piñata. Have any of y'all ever hit a piñata before? Do you know what a piñata is? What's inside a piñata? Great. So y'all have a deep meaning of the word piñata because you've had an experience with this object. That's the difference between deep and shallow processing. They like to ask about multitasking. The fact that when your attention is divided, you feel, it's funny, you feel like your brain's doing a good job of going back and forth between the two things. In reality, you're doing a worse job at both. Whereas selective attention is when you're good at focusing on something. Your brain will be happier if like when you go on Instagram, if you're just totally immersed in Instagram, and if while you're in class, you're answering Mr. Jones's questions and you're participating and talking and highlighting and underlining in your notebook. If you try to get on Instagram and scroll while you're also studying, your brain's going to think you're doing a good job at both, but really it's not getting very much out of it either. That's the idea of selective attention. So when you think about your own life and processing, when you think about your thinking, that is called metacognition. You think about what you know, how your brain works, what you're good at, what you're bad at, okay? Are y'all better at language arts or psychology class? How many of you say you're better at language arts? A few folks. How many of you say you're better at psychology? And if I say, well, why? As you think to yourself, well, in psychology, I do this and this and that, and in language arts, I have trouble with this and this and that. That's you doing metacognition. You're thinking about your thinking. Any questions about standard 1? Just the general overview of how thinking works, cognition. Eating, space, time, stories, social relationships, those are automatic processing. Things that you don't have to try very hard or make flashcards for. Yeah, when you get hungry, your brain's just automatically processing that kind of stuff, right? If I ask you what you had for lunch today, your brain just kind of automatically keeps track of what you're putting inside of your system in case you get sick in an hour. Your brain just wants to make sure that it knows what was the last thing you put into your tummy. That's automatic processing. Yeah. But if I ask you, what pages you did for reading for homework last Thursday, you have no idea because that's not important for your survival. All right. The second standard is about memory processes. So big picture memory. I think the encoding, storage, retrieval we did think we did like a class on each, or a video on each, or a day on each. What day was this in your notes? Unit 5, when we did encoding, storage, retrieval?
Day 1. Oh, I retrieval day 2.
Okay, so day 1 and day 2 was a mix of both. So maybe we started on day 1 and finished up on day 2. So it's just like what happens with your memories. So they sometimes ask about different mnemonic devices. So data you can like form pictures for things, or make connections, or sing songs, or relate it to yourself. The self-referent effect. There's some other fancier mnemonic devices that you can look up as well. But they sometimes like to talk about how you can improve your memory. The third thing is things that can go wrong with your memory. Amnesia is always, there's an accident. Amnesia, a word, goes with an accident. So like you get hit in the head by a baseball, or you're in a car accident. You either will forget the things from before the accident, or the things that happen after the accident. Which one is retro? Forgetting the older stuff or the newer stuff? Retro. Retro is forgetting the old stuff. Retro means old, so forgetting stuff from before the accident. Anterograde amnesia is forgetting this from after the accident. We also have what's called interference. Interference does not involve an accident. Interference is just like a normal part of life where we have like two pieces of information, interference, information, and we get it mixed up. The examples they love to give are Old Spanish and New French. So you're like learning foreign languages. Which ones do you forget? Sometimes they ask about old boyfriend, new boyfriend. And sometimes they ask about like old phone number, new phone number. But if you forgot the old one, same as with amnesia, which one means you forgot the old? Retroactive. If you took Spanish in middle school, French now, and if you forget your middle school Spanish because of the French, that's retroactive interference. If you took Spanish in middle school and French now, and you're forgetting your French, that's proactive interference, because pro means you're forgetting the later information. So always, retro means forgetting the old. Retro, forgetting the old. Something else that can go wrong with your memory is called blocking. When the information is in your brain, it's been encoded and stored, but you have a retrieval problem. It's on the tip of your tongue. This happens to all of us. Does not mean you're broken. It's just a natural part of cognition. Any questions about the memory stuff as you look through your notes, Sarah? So retrograde is like you had an accident and you've forgotten everything from before the accident and it ain't coming back. So amnesia, there was an accident. Interference is like you're just getting two pieces of info mixed up. Yeah, and both of them you've forgotten the older thing. But it's like, is it because you got hit in the head and you have amnesia and it's never coming back? Or are you just temporarily mixed up on these things in your life? Amnesia is worse than interference for sure. Retroactive interference, you're forgetting the old. Yeah, so the new thing is interfering. Yeah, the French you're learning now is interfering with this old Spanish. Yeah, that's the idea of interference. There's new information, there's old information, and they're getting in each other's way. There's an accident, and you can't remember new stuff from after the accident. This is 51st Dates. This is Jason Bourne. He can't remember anything about his past. This is like Dory can't make new memories. Actually, I think Dory has both. Dory was real messed up. Whatever she had is not real. Priming is when I get you ready to think a certain way. So if I tell you to say the word silk 5 times fast, silk, 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 and I ask you, what do cows drink? Your brain wants to say milk, because I've primed you to think a certain way. In reality, what do cows drink? They drink water. Yeah, they make milk.
The baby cows drink milk.
I don't think they do.
What? Yes, they do.
I don't know.
Every baby mammal.
Every baby mammal drinks milk? Okay, that was stupid.
Every cow, baby cow drinks milk.
Standard 3. Types of memory. So Atkinson and Shiffrin were these researchers that said 3 types of memory. Stuff you're looking at right now. It's called sensory memory. If I look out at y'all and I close my eyes real quick, I can still see Jaden's bright blue shirt or Kaylee's weird reddish colored shirt, right? I have this like brief sensory memory. It can be a sound, an echo, in my ears, or it can be an icon. It can be something that I see for just a brief amount of time, but it's based on your senses. They said that the second level of memory is your working memory, or something called short-term memory. It's like, what are you paying attention to? What are you working on right now? What's the math problem you're doing? What are you writing? What are you thinking about now? What are you trying to remember right now this second? What's in your mind? The third stage of memory was what they call long-term memory, which is when your neurons have actually changed. Action potentials have gotten these neurons all twisted up. Long-term potentiation, that's when the neurons fire together and wire together. And that's when the memories are going to be in your mind for a very long time. So out of all the long-term memories, we have implicit and explicit. So the implicit memories are body memories, procedural memories, actions that your body does. That was on the mock exam from last week. Muscle memories, it's stuff in your cerebellum having to do with balance and hand-eye coordination and movement. So you have implicit memories like playing the piano, and you have explicit memories, which are things you can actually explain, things that you can state or declare. It might be facts that are true for everybody. It might be episodes in your own life. But explicit memories are like facts or moments that you can talk about, and those are stored in your hippocampus. The best example of these videos of this type of memory is I showed you the really sad video about the guy who'd had a hippocampus messed up, and he couldn't even recognize, he couldn't remember his kids when his wife was in the room. If he felt like he hadn't seen her in years. You remember the video I showed y'all where he like was so excited to hug his wife, but he could play the piano because his cerebellum was fine. It was his hippocampus. So he had the ability to play the piano and walk and move around. He just didn't have the ability to recall things and explain things and answer questions. Other types of memories. If you try to remember something for the future, again, this root pro, just like with proactive, it's about memories for the future. Trying to remember what you're going to do when you get home, or what you got to do on Saturday, or make sure you do this before prom. A flashbulb memory is something that is so powerful and emotional that it sticks with you forever. That's what a flashbulb memory is. It's like that thing is frozen in your mind. It can be something really positive and good, or it can be something really negative. Any of y'all see Inside Out? Those like core memories she talks about, those are like flashbulb memories for that little girl. What was her name? Riley? Right. So little Riley and the hockey team, or little Riley and the moments with her family. Those are her flashbulb memories in her mind. Questions about standard 3? So we have the Atkinson-Shiffrin model here. Sensory memory is what's around you. When you pay attention to something, it goes to your working memory. And then if you practice it enough, if you rehearse it enough, maintenance, rehearsal, elaborative rehearsal, those are words that you need to make sure you understand. If you encode it enough, it can go into your long-term memory, where all you have to do is retrieve it. And of course, over time, you do forget some things. And we'll talk about Ebbinghaus and forgetting here in a second. Here's another chart that might be helpful for you when we talk about memory. You got sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. Within long-term memory, you have the implicit and explicit stuff. The implicit stuff is your muscle memories, like procedures, skills, and tasks. And your explicit memories are your ability to declare things that happen to you, or just facts that are true for everybody. You should be able to answer any questions about the different types of memory. After we talked about memory in this unit, we talked about problem solving, how creativity works, how sometimes your brain needs to incubate. It needs to rest and think about a problem overnight or for days. We talked about when you're trying to get to a single answer, convergent thinking, versus when you're trying to come up with lots of different creative solutions, divergent thinking. Some people are good at finding the right answer on a multiple choice test, but they're really bad at being creative. It's different types of thinking, different types of intelligence. Pardon again? Convergent, you're trying to get to the one right answer. Like you got 5 answer choices and you're trying to converge or narrow them down to the one right answer choice. Divergent is when I say, like, how many uses can you come up with for a paperclip? And Nathan comes up with 4, Jaden comes up with 12, and Stacy comes up with 73. We'd say, wow, Stacy is a divergent thinker. She can come up with lots of creative answers. The word heuristic means a what? It refers to a mental shortcut, a way that your brain is lazy. So when you are asked a question, you either think the answer is the first thing that pops into your mind. That's called the availability heuristic. Or you just like think about stereotypes, what represents the idea best, and that's how you answer the question. Both of those are your brain making lazy shortcuts. That's what heuristics are. An algorithm is when I ask you a question and you try every possible solution to guarantee you get the accurate answer. So you're looking for chocolate Pop-Tarts in the grocery store. What would a heuristic be? You look for chocolate Pop-Tarts, what might be your shortcut? Look for the breakfast aisle. Great. Oh, there's granola bars over there. I bet it's near those. What would an algorithm be to find chocolate Pop-Tarts in the grocery store? Up and down every single aisle. Very good. Cognitive biases, there's a whole list of those. I don't remember what day it was. If you're following along your notes, do y'all see a list somewhere of cognitive biases? Things like self-serving bias and all these different things that your brain does. Make sure that you go back and look through those. We talked about functional fixedness in the practice questions. What day? Self-serving, I think it was in like multiple units. I think that we talked about this one. I think we also talked about in social psych maybe. Flip through your Unit 5 notebook and see if you can find anything about the biases. This unit we all talked about intelligence. What day was intelligence in your notebook? Okay, cognitive biases on day 3. Can you read them out? General thinking flaws. Yeah, those are the cognitive biases. Thinking flaws. Cognitive biases. What were they? Overconfidence effect. We think we're more right than we really are. Belief bias. Once we have our mind made up. We stick with it. The gambler's fallacy. If it's been head 7 times in a row, we're like, surely tails will come up. The anchoring bias. The first time we hear something, we think it's true. Confirmation bias. When we make up our mind about something, we only look for information that confirms what we believe. We don't agree with or pay attention to anything that might disagree with us because we want to think that we're right. Nice. So that was day 3. On day 5, so I'm going to put Unit 5, day 3 for those thinking flaws. And then intelligence on day 5. There's different types of intelligence. Some of y'all are good with words, verbal intelligence, but some of y'all have more creative intelligence. There's fluid intelligence, which is your ability to solve problems and think quickly on your feet. Younger people have more fluid intelligence. Older people are better at like crossword puzzles. That was a mnemonic I gave y'all. Crystallized intelligence, all these facts and names and dates that are just stuck in their brain. That's what older folks are better at, crystallized intelligence. We talked about the Flynn Effect. Oh, humans are getting smarter over time. These might be new terms. I don't remember if we talked about these or not. Stereotype threat. If you don't have that written down somewhere, write it down off to the side. It's its own standard. Stereotype threat is when you are aware that other people stereotype you, and that impacts your performance. So some famous examples. Some people think that boys are better at math than girls. So if you have a bunch of kids take a math test and you have them bubble in, whether they're biological male, biological female, females will actually do worse in the math test than if you didn't have them bubble. Because it's almost like by reminding them they're a girl, it actually makes them worse at the math.
Wait, so what is it when you know that your stereotype it affects what you do?
Stereotype threat?
You are aware that.
That's what it is.
That's what I
Yeah. Stereotype threat. So there's been examples of this like in sports, like especially sports where there are certain attributes and characteristics that like are stereotypically associated with one particular race or type of person, like tall people versus short people, right? Or black versus white, Hispanic versus Asian. Like if there's any sort of stereotype threat is when people do worse, not because of their actual abilities, but because like the fact that they know they're being stereotyped, it messes with them. I think I told y'all, when y'all take your math test or when you take your AP exam, you should just tell yourself right beforehand, like, I am an Asian male. And that'll help you on your test, because like the stereotype is that, Asian males are going to be great at their math or whatever it is. So really, really bizarre research. So you can tell yourself that. A culture fair test is related. If I give y'all a test and basketball players do really well on it and everyone else fails, or if I give you a test and guys do really well and girls don't, or if I give you a test where 20-year-olds do great and 12-year-olds do not, my test is not culture fair. A good test, people should do well on it, from all sorts of different cultures. So if they don't do well on it, it means that my test is biased. So we got to make sure we have good tests. This matters when we're measuring intelligence for purposes like intellectual disability, IQ of below 70, and they cannot live on their own. We talked about being gifted, which is 1 or 2 standard deviations above the mean. Do you remember what a savant is? I had to watch some videos of some savants. They're really good at one thing, but they probably have an intellectual disability. So I showed you some savants who could do math or calculations or had weird memories. The guy who could draw from his memory right after he saw Paris or New York a single time. And I told you the guy who couldn't speak or talk, but was able to play the piano, even though he'd never taken lessons. So those are savants. The math stuff. Intelligence testing, standardized tests, how we have to have these norms where we can compare people. We talked about reliability and validity. This was also in Unit 1 stuff. We've talked about the normal curve and those 3 magic numbers, standard deviation, 68, 95, 99.7, about how when you're doing IQ measurements, IQ has an average of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. So you'll need to be able to do some of this math stuff and know whether or not a test is doing its job. Here's the chart of 68, 95, 99.7. So if IQ averages 100, 68% of people score between an 85 and a 115. 95% of people score between a 70 and a 130. And 99.7% of people score within 3 standard deviations of the mean below and 3 standard deviations of the mean above the average. That's what those 3 magic numbers refer to. Question about one of these terms? We good? Standard 7 of 9. The same unit we talked about language. So much stuff in this one unit. The different components of language. Semantics is the meaning. Syntax is the order you put the words in. Which one is just sound? Phonemes or morphemes? Phonemes are just the sounds people make. What are morphemes? The smallest units of language that have meaning, right? So if I put an S at the end of a word, what does that mean for that word? You're making it plural. That's a morpheme. We talked about how Chomsky believed that language was natural, that there's a critical period that you have to be exposed to language, but you have a part of your brain in charge of language, right? Broca's area and Wernicke's area. We talked about the stages of language. They start out all making the same noises. And what's the difference between cooing and babbling? When they babble, it sounds like what? Whatever language they've been exposed to. That's what babbling is. Hollow phrases, how many words? Telegraphic speech is like 2-word short phrases. They're really bad with grammar rules, so they overuse them. They over-regularize. My mommy teached me that already. Teached. My foots are hurting me. He hitted me. They're overusing grammar rules, putting an S on things they shouldn't, adding ED to things they shouldn't. So Piaget said this is a sign that they're trying to pick up on language. Worf said the specific language we speak determines how we think. Linguistic determinism. If you speak Spanish, where nouns have either masculine or feminine articles, that's going to impact the way you think about those objects. If you know more words for colors, you will see color differently than I do. Language determines your thinking. If you have a problem with language, if you can't understand what people are saying, that's called Wernicke's aphasia. If you have trouble speaking, it's called Broca's aphasia. But aphasia is just any kind of problem with speaking. Questions about language stuff? What day are we up to in your notebooks for language? Day 7? Okay. So here are the last 2 standards here, just all the people. So the language people, Chomsky, Ebbinghaus was about memory and how memories can ebb away. They can flow away, they forget. The spacing effect is better to do a little bit each day than all at once. We talked about Kohler and the aha moments. Elizabeth Loftus was the research on how the way they asked the question, how fast was the car going when it hit the pole, when it smashed the pole. The way we ask the question can actually impact what people remember. So she talked about eyewitness testimony is not reliable on how people can have what's called false memories. They remember things that didn't actually happen. George Miller said that on average, you can hold 7 things in your working memory. We talked about chunking in this unit. You can kind of lump things together. That's a mnemonic to remember things. I know it's a lot of people, but you need to make flashcards, get on the Quizlet, rewrite them, come up with mnemonics, picture things, come up with songs, rhymes, tricky things depending on their words to help you remember all these names. Here are all the names about intelligence. Do you remember these guys? Binet came up with the IQ test. He had the formula. Mental age over chronological age times 100. Terman was the guy who worked at Stanford University who made the English version of it. Galton, he believed in eugenics, which is this idea that like we should only let smart people have kids. A little racist. Hitler loved Galton. Spearman, I think about a general having a spear, and he said that like, if you're smart at one thing, you'll be smart at everything. That was Spearman's idea. Gardner said, no. Like a garden has lots of different types of plants. He said, we have lots of different types of intelligences. He called it multiple intelligences. Sternberg, when I see Berg, I think about an iceberg. I picture a triangle. He had the three-part theory of intelligence: analytical, practical, creative intelligence. Wechsler with the W, he created these modern tests that are used most often to tell people's intelligence nowadays. We went over these mnemonics. Make sure you look back at them. Test yourself, practice. Any questions about these people or connections? Okay, I've been posting these PowerPoints and I will post this class recording so y'all can go over things. There's also crash courses that cover this stuff. Look back at your old tests, do the progress checks. The progress checks are the best example in practice for what the actual AP questions will look like because they're made by the College Board who makes the AP exam. Let's look at this last free response here. Savannah is a junior in high school preparing for an exam in her Japanese course. The exam will have written and spoken portions. It's her first course in Japanese. She is confident she will do well in the exam. So part A, how do the following things relate to her learning? Broca's area, so her ability to speak. Phonemes, her ability to make the sounds. Modeling, her having someone to be watching and learning from. That's Bandura's theory. And then chunking, her grouping information into meaningful chunks. Part B, what does the word hinder mean? So part A is about her being successful. Part B is going to be about her being, to hinder means to hurt. So how might these things hurt her? Encoding failure. If she's not paying attention, it might not get into her brain in the first place. Who's better at learning language, young people or old people? Great. So you might want to say something for this one, like if she had been taking the course when she was 5, she'd have a better chance of learning quickly than when she's 17, because as you get older, it's hard to learn new languages. Part C, after the exam, Savannah tells her family and friends that she believes she spoke fluently and did extremely well. Self-efficacy. You remember what self-efficacy is? Belief in oneself. It's the belief that your actions matter, that you can do what you say you can do. It's not just self-esteem. It's not just feeling good about yourself, but it's feeling that you can accomplish the thing you want to accomplish. So she is showing high self-efficacy because she believes she accomplished the things she wanted to accomplish. And confirmation bias, because she already thought that she was going to do well, it's sort of a self-serving bias, self-fulfilling prophecy. She will only think she does well because she's already had her mind made up. So I'm not going to make y'all go through this, but this particular kid got points 1, 2, and 4. She explained that Broca's area is speaking, phonemes or sounds. She did not talk about point 3 here, modeling. She did not talk about modeling is when you can see what someone else does and you copy them. She did get point 4 about grouping things together. She only got point 5. If encoding failure happens, it's because it did not get into long-term memory. So she explained encoding. Homie just left number 6 blank, which was what? Age and language acquisition. Man, all she had to do was say that like little kids are better at learning language than older kids. So y'all always try the free response, even if you're not confident about it, because you never know. It could just be a common sense thing. She did not get point 7 because she did not explain that self-efficacy is your personal belief about your abilities. And she did not get point 8 because she did not talk about how confirmation bias is when you only pay attention to confirming information. So y'all's homework, progress checks 4 and 5. I'm gonna let y'all do them now for 20, 25 minutes if you want to. Progress check 5 is the longer one. So just make sure you're working on that. Finish that up by Friday. I recommend that y'all retake your old tests, look back at your most missed questions, Get on eClass. There's a Kahoot you can play if you like Kahoots. You can do your own Quizlet. You can steal my Quizlet. You can make your own Bluekit. I can send you a Bluekit if you want one. Let me know. There's crash course videos to watch. You can rewatch my lecture videos. Y'all can make flashcards, but do what you got to do. We got 25 minutes left. Use this time to study some psychology.